Good evening, my friends. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about freedom of speech. Hi, puppy. Lucy wants to say hi as well. Say hi, Lucy. Hi. Freedom of speech in the sense of the right to say what we want is only partially what I'm talking about here. And I'm hoping that I can condense a few ideas freestyle that are bouncing around in my head. As I was in there doing dishes, I always have these weird thoughts in my head while I'm like in the middle of any project like that, where I start processing these theoretical situations. Kind of like when I'm driving or walking and I think of running into a particular situation. And I talk to other people who know where I'm coming from on this, but it's our mind's way of planning for situations. The same way that when you're dreaming, you seem to come up with solutions and ideas to problems you don't even know you had, even though a lot of folks don't remember their dreams, but that's another story altogether. I digress. Using language is one of those gifts that we are just so. It's like studying consciousness. You are conscious, so you can't really study it. We use language, therefore, we can't really comprehend what it would be like to not have it. We can watch other people who don't have it, and we can see communication barriers. But generally, it allows us to express certain feelings, certain ideas, down to very specific ideas. Now, along with this language of ideas comes a language of, let's just say, alternative words, whether it be insults, jabs, or racial slurs. I've noticed an unfolding pattern over my lifetime, which is pretty well known, the idea that people's language is changing. The way that, for example, when my mother was a kid, using the NWord was regular. It wasn't a huge deal. To some people it was, but to general society it wasn't going to get you in trouble. You fast forward to when I was a kid, a lot of people still used the word, but it was falling way out of fashion, and you were kind of just, people would roll their eyes at you or, be like, oh, that racist guy I work with. Today it's changed to the point where if you say that word, you can get fired from your job. You can be ridiculed, lambasted, and harassed for years on Twitter and elsewhere. Whether or not this is a positive change, public humiliation when somebody does something like that, I'm not going to delve into that much here. I think that it's a multifaceted issue. It can be beneficial, but all it does is plugs the garden hose. And I was trying to think of some metaphor. I guess that's the only one that really will pop into my head, is the language that comes pouring through would be, the flow of water. Now, when you plug that hose and you try to tell people, nope, you can't use this word, you can't say this, you can't use this caricature, you can't do anything that might be slightly offensive to others, it gradually plugs that hose more and more. Now, eventually it's got to give because that water keeps flowing. Those thoughts and feelings keep flowing. Just because you tell somebody they can't use a certain word, well, let me put it this way. At least when the water's flowing through the hose, you know where it's ending up. Whereas it could burst at any point if it's not allowed to flow. And what I mean by that is when we cut off channels of people's speech through YouTube, through Twitter, through anywhere, under the guise of protecting people, even though I'm a liberal, I find it just a horrible decision to make, to try to censor people's speech because they will just go to other places. In other words, like the hose, wouldn't you rather have all of that flowing into a place where at least you can condense it and isolate it rather than... And what I mean by that is maybe pro-Nazi propaganda that you might find on YouTube, right? They went through and they censored and cut out all this kind of stuff. And I wanted to bring up I can't even say the word because certain topics I can't even talk about because they're not discussable because of this ongoing language issue. Well, what happened in with the Jews? There are a lot of Holocaust deniers out there, right? Well, often when we talk about language and the danger of language, it leads people to start bringing up things like Nazi Germany. In other words, saying, well, look at what happens when we when we marginalize one race or when we allow this to flourish. The thing is, I wanted to point out, is this is the direct opposite of freedom of speech. In other words, some people will say, look at what freedom of speech, the ability to say whatever you want, it led to, what happened in Germany. Well, it's actually the opposite. It was a lack of freedom of speech that led to this. It was just that you were only allowed to use the approved words. In other words, you were encouraged to rat on your neighbor, to tell on anyone who may be part of any other group or helping the Jews, anything like that. And so, therefore, yeah, if you said the wrong thing, then you would go to prison too. And that was fascism at its best. A fascist society tries to suppress the language of the people. Therefore, when a society is trying to move forward and change their own language, like we are now, and stop using racial slurs and stop being offensive to people, it comes across as fascist. And this is something I've been mulling around in my head for a long time. And what I mean was, like, the extreme conservative right, when they might start talking about, people should be able to say whatever they want, however hateful it might be. And I'm not saying the conservative right is hateful. I'm saying, like, extreme right-wing groups. They get offended merely by the left being offended within their own group, their own extreme groups, where they don't want to hear any language. They don't want to hear anybody say anything that might slightly marginalize somebody. And it brings us to the point where we're arguing about Dr. Seuss's books. But here we are, and it's an issue we got to talk about. So, language itself, when my friends and I were young and we didn't know any better, we used all kinds of offensive and racial slurs when we were, 9, 10, 12, 14. We lived in an area where, it wasn't like we were sheltered, but it wasn't like we were exposed to any adversity. It was just, you hear words, you think they're funny, and you use them. And I feel like a lot of folks today get caught up in that. They're not racists. They're not hateful people. They just say the wrong thing at the wrong time, and they lose their career or their life over it. So if a few people get wrapped up in it, a few of people who mean well get wrapped up in this type of mob mentality, carrying the torches and trying to stop people from speaking and saying certain things, is that really a productive way to run our society? It's kind of like, if a few innocent people go to prison, can we really rely on eyewitness testimony? And obviously we do anyway, so it doesn't matter what theoretically it should be, because it is what it is. It always has been. But I guess I'm just trying to get my balance from a guy in the middle, a guy who has always been a liberal-minded person, who cares about people from all other creeds, cultures, religions. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what religion you are. Just do your thing and let me do mine, is my attitude. And some people I can see have just taken things too far. I've been accused of being a racist by people because they have been so treated so horribly by people of my color that it's like a reverse racism, and that frustrated me. I've had Native Americans 2 or 3 times tell me it was my fault, it was my people. Hey man, I don't play that game, because it has to go both ways. You can't, you can't blame people's ancestors for what happened to your ancestors, and that would frustrate me as well. This was right at the beginning of when all these things started changing, it was through the 90s and the 2000s. It's like, it was when I started noticing things like how in rappers could talk a whole bunch of shit about white people and get away with it. But if one white artist tried that, it would be doomsday for them, right? And I noticed this when I was young. I was like, wow, how can they say this about white people? I thought we were trying to get away from this. And this frustrated people in the black community too, and the rapper community. People, basically they'd say, you're bringing down your own race, you're bringing down your own group, your own culture. Especially the way that they used NWord constantly within their raps, but they would say, that's our word, and it's this controversial issue surrounding a word, the most controversial word right now in this nation, which is constantly blasted on rap channels and rap songs. To this day, there are songs that are filled with that word, the N-word, 2 dozen, 3 dozen times within the song. It is such a normal part of a certain fabric within our society that it's not even a second thought within language to people who are black. Some people who are black. And I'm only bringing that up as the point that it's strange. It's a strange paradox how a word can be both so loathed and despised and yet be so used. And that's just one, you know? There are other issues I could bring up, like drawing Chinese caricatures, like they did in comic books, say, back in the 40s and 50s, during times when we were scared of the Japanese, when we had internment camps. It's a soft spot. But not everyone who says, who does this to mimic a Japanese person, or everyone who goes in blackface to an event, or everyone who goes is a racist. It's ridiculous to think that. And I guess that's all I really have to say. I just want to get those points across. I feel like if you're really confident in who you are, and you know that you don't mean well, you know you mean well, and you don't mean harm, and you're not, judgmental or a racist, when you use terms like this, or you get caught off guard by saying the wrong thing, people get very offended by it, and you're like, wait a minute, I'm on your side here. I'm not trying to offend anyone. And meanwhile, the person that they're trying to protect is like, that's not offensive to me. And that's where the social justice warrior comes from. The people who step in and try to protect others, even when those people don't really necessarily ask for their protection or need it. That's a tricky one, I've got to say. I don't play well with people who try to tell me what words to use, because I feel like I have the best grasp on what I say, and I feel like every other adult feels the same way. And it is, hey, it's embarrassing for society the way we've treated one another for so long, and the types of injustices and horrible language we've used. But, now people are getting offended by words like master bedroom, or, because of where it comes from. It was the master's bedroom, and I get that, but I think that this terminology is really, it's holding us back from true, meaningful discourse and change, because we're so caught up in the words. And if we don't want to hear those words, they're just going to be pushed into the back of our minds, the back of the dark corners of the internet. It's better that we have these things out in the open so we can talk about them. And that's my thoughts on words in 2021. Talk to you later, folks. Thanks for coming. How much time? Is this still recording? Oh, good. Yeah. Anyway, somebody asked about my Kratom videos the other day, and they're actually on Patreon now. I had to unlist them from YouTube. And as I said, I've had my other channel blocked for a couple weeks, so I just took all my controversial videos and basically made them into my own little folders, and now I'm going to find my own host and source to upload them to. And a lot of the more controversial topics I have just uploaded the topics into my podcast format for a 15-minute free thinking podcast. So check that out. And peace out. Talk to you later.